You know, if they'd have told me that after sitting in a room for 2 hours, that there'd have been so many people who were still excited about learning about impacting your legislator, I would have told them I'd be surprised, and I am surprised. I mean, look at all the people in here just to see me, right? Certainly, there's no other reason why nobody's leaving their chairs, and those that are saying, "Save me a place." They don't want to miss what I'm about to say. I work for the Americans for Prosperity Foundation's Grassroots Leadership Academy. We are the training arm of the Americans for Prosperity Foundation. We work all across the country to help people learn how to break through barriers, whether they be internal belief systems or external barriers that one of our key institutions have put in their place. And I've been an activist now since about 2001, right around September, give or take 11th or 12th, I started getting involved. And today we're going to talk about impacting your legislator. What I want to find out first, though, is a little bit about you. So if you don't mind, I know we've been in here a while, if you have ever engaged your school board, would you please stand up? Now keep standing. If you've ever engaged your city council, please stand up. If you've ever engaged your state rep or your state senator, please stand up. And if you've ever engaged with your congressman or your senator in Washington, please stand up. Look at all the experience right in this room right now. Now, if you've ever had that engagement and you felt like your message didn't get through or you didn't have the impact you wanted, sit down. And that's the problem, isn't it? You can all sit down. Mainly I wanted to get a lot of people on their feet so we could move around some. But that's the problem, isn't it? It shouldn't be that difficult for us to be heard. Where does government get its power, after all? From us, right? We ought to be listened to, and yet we're not. So what I'd like you to do for a quick moment is at your tables, let's take about 2 minutes. At your tables, I'd like you to discuss ways that you've engaged with political leaders during your activism time. So I have these small conversations at your tables. You two can just talk to each other. Do you know each other? That explains why you're sitting next to one another. So we'll take 2 minutes and do that. That's been about 2 minutes. I want to thank you all for taking the time to have those conversations. I'm going to come down off the stage because I'm not really comfortable standing on the stage when all of you beautiful people are out here. I was going to say beautiful weirdos because we are kind of weirdos, aren't we? I mean, it's a beautiful day in Atlanta Friday and we're in a ballroom listening to a guy talk about impacting political leaders. That's kind of weird. But it's beautiful because we're here and we're going to be the ones that make the change. So what I'd like you all to do, everyone put your finger up in the air. Now, on the count of 3, you are going to point at the person at your table that will be your table's group leader. Ready? 1, 2, 3. It's all you, man. It's all you. Okay, group leaders, I've got a job for you. Group leaders, your job now is to pick the person at your table who's going to be the spokesperson for your table. So let's find out some of the examples of ways people have impacted their political leaders. This table right here, who's your spokesperson? What were some of the things that were talked about at your table? So what kind of experiences? What specifically did they do?
Emails.
See, now you're all wishing you paid attention, aren't you?
Yeah. Emails, phone calls. I've been to the Gold Dome multiple times a year.
So emails, phone calls, but actually going in person. What else? How about this table over here? What were some examples here?
but also talk to them personally and
Right.
email.
So he said working with the candidates and getting to know them personally. That's an excellent way. This table have a spokesperson? All right. Well, give me one example from your table.
We organized a group of people who all contacted our city council members and visited them and went to city council meetings.
Organized a group that visited political leaders, congressmen, state reps, and whatnot. These are all great things. And what matters is actually showing up and engaging. I'm going to move a little bit more towards the front now. When I was, for a while, I was a political blogger, recovering blogger now. And I still have the itch, trust me. And when I was blogging on a state level, I'd visit the state capitol as often as I could, to the point where one of the state senators said to me one day, "Dwayne, if you need a spot to write when you're in the state capitol, you can use my office." And so I'd be blogging in a state senator's office, and it was kind of weird because you'd look around and say, how did I even get here? And I remember one morning watching his legislative aide, and his legislative aide was going through his emails, going through his phone voicemails, and going through texts. And I said to him, how many phone calls does the senator need to get on a specific issue before the senator starts paying attention? How many people need to call on one issue before the senator starts asking questions about what's going on? What do you think the number was? 5, 10,000 I heard? 10? 100? 50? This kid looked at me and he said 6. If he gets 6 calls, he's wondering what's going on. And I thought, what a sad indictment for Missourians and American people as a whole. That if 6 people are engaged, suddenly the senator's concerned that there's 6 people. But politics goes to those who show up, doesn't it? And showing up, it can mean phone calls, it can mean emails, but it means showing up. So when we talk about impacting political leaders, there are really 6 ways that you can do this. And the first one, it's obvious, build relationships. When I first started blogging in Missouri, I started showing up at events that I had no business being at. I'd drive 3 or 4 hours to take photos of the state's Speaker of the House at a local event in his district. The first time I showed up, I got the side eye, like who's this guy? What's he doing here? The second time I showed up at one of his events, he recognized me. By the 4th or 5th time I showed up, he would greet me. He knew who I was, and we would chat to the point where I could get a meeting in his office, and it wasn't a problem. Who else should I be building a relationship with? Just shout it out. AIDS, his staff. Why is that so important? Why do you think getting a relationship with their aides is so important? They are the gatekeeper. They are absolutely the gatekeeper. Another thing, well, you should definitely get to know the spouses too, the real decision makers. When you get to know a staff member for a political leader, you can actually gain more credibility that way. Because if you're the senator and I happen to get 5 minutes of your time one day, and I come in and I make my pitch and I leave, you don't know me from Adam. I could be anybody. Who will I have more access to? The staff. I'll have a lot more time to build a relationship with that staff member. That staff member has more time to talk with me. And then I can pitch that staff member. And then if the chief of staff comes to you and says, Senator Stevens, I want to talk to you about an issue that one of your constituents has a problem with, suddenly my issue is being carried by a trusted messenger. Suddenly my issue has a lot more credibility. So we've talked about getting to know the political leaders, but more importantly, getting to know their aides and getting to know their spouses. Who else should you build a relationship with if you can? One you might not think of, When I first started blogging, a friend of mine, John Fleischman, he's a conservative blogger in California. He's the one. And when I started, he said, Dwayne, if you really want to make an impact, if you really want to make them sweat, write about something they've done and then email it to their donors. I'm here to tell you it works. So you should get to know their donors, and that isn't that hard to do. Most states, I'm not sure what Georgia does, but most states have this information online, and you can find out. And you can go to events and seek them out and speak with them, and you're building a relationship, and that's important. Because relationships are built on trust, and trust is like a bank account. Now, not all of us can open a bank account with a giant deposit. Most of us make small deposits over time. And then eventually you have a fat bottom line. Trust is the same way. You make small deposits of trust, and then eventually you have a lot of trust, and you can build on that. It takes time. It takes showing up. It takes being engaged. Another way that we can do this is to practice effective messaging. Now, one tool that we teach at the Grassroots Leadership Academy is the public narrative, and it has 3 parts. You see it up here. Your story of self, your story of us, and your story of now. This comes from a man named Marshall Gans. Anybody ever heard of him? You may have heard of one of the people he helped with their messaging. At the time, he was a little-known state senator from Illinois, and he helped him write a speech that he gave at a convention that launched his presidential career. Marshall Gans helped President Barack Obama, with his speeches. Say what you want, but the man can move people with his words. And the public narrative is your story of self. This is why this issue is important to me, Senator. But this is why it's important to us. Here's the story of how it impacts both of us and why we need to act on it now. So, effective messaging, your public narrative, your story of self. Here's how this is impacting me. Your story of us, here's how it's impacting us. And your story of right now, this is why we have to do something right now. Now, I want to point out stories. We tend to speak more in logic and facts, don't we? We tend to be moved more by logic and facts. People as a whole tend to be motivated by stories. I asked this question in Alaska. I was teaching in Wasilla, Alaska. Anybody been to Alaska? I recommend it. It's beautiful, isn't it? I recommend it. I told the wife we were moving up there. She said we weren't, so we still live in Missouri. But I asked this room, why use stories? You do remember them. But the answer I got back from the back of the room, where most answers come from for some reason, it's weird. That's where your troublemakers sit and your people who want to talk. I said, why use stories? And this guy in the back of the room said, we use stories because people buy with emotion and they justify with logic. Let that sit for a second, because that hit me. I said, say that again. He said, people buy with emotion and they justify with logic. That's true, isn't it? Think of how many people you know that you know they are wrong about something, and no matter what you send them, they refuse to accept it. You know folks like this, don't you? They are obviously wrong. They won't buy it because they've already bought in with emotion. People tend to want to be consistent, and it's painful for them to admit when they're wrong. That creates pain. That's emotion, and so they find any way they can to justify that. People buy with emotion, and they justify with logic. And with stories, you can generate that emotion. Another good point is that we pay attention to them. Your mind suffers from what I like to call the up effect, or the squirrel effect. I have 8 kids, so I've seen the movie Up at least 100 times, minimum. So in this movie, these dogs are constantly distracted by squirrels. Anything that comes up, it's squirrel. What were we talking about? 2,000 times a day, your mind goes somewhere else. 2,000 times a day. But when you start telling a story, we lock in. We want to hear the rest of that story. Stories break that squirrel effect. They bring people into your world. And what's something weird, and this is science. Science is kind of cool. If I start telling a story to you, and I start describing the last time I went to the beach, it was actually in Texas. We drove from northwest Missouri to Corpus Christi, Texas, in a 12-passenger van with 10 kids. Yeah. So in Texas, there's a place called Buc-ee's that's like a Walmart. You know Buc-ee's. We stopped at every Buc-ee's. And Buc-ee's has these rubber chickens. And these rubber chickens sound like a child screaming. And my son bought one. And then when he started playing with it, 3 of the other kids wanted one. And guess what they got at the next Buc-ee's? So hours upon hours of driving, hearing in quad stereo these rubber chickens. But it was a beautiful thing because, we were on our way to the beach. And when we get to the beach, I start telling you the story about how the sand felt between my toes. At first it was hot, but then we got used to it. And we made our way to the beach, and slowly the sand got cooler and cooler and cooler. And then we finally got that first taste of the ocean in our mouths from the mist. As I'm describing these things, the parts of my brain that are firing in your brain too. The sense of sand between your toes activates a part of your brain. The taste of the salt activates a part of your brain. But if I just sit and give you facts, the only part of your brain that activates is the part that processes dialogue. So I can have you sit there and just process dialogue. He just said dialogue. Dialogue means words and blah, blah, blah. Or I can have you actually feel emotion, feel what I'm feeling. Stories allow you to do that. So if you can engage with your political leaders with a story, you're going to be far more impactful than you do if you just bring, yes, Senator, I wanted to talk to you about the latest information I have on the impact of farm subsidies. Here's what you can see here. Thank you. I appreciate you. I'll set that next to my round file. I'll take a look at it later. Tell them a story. Be impactful that way. This goes back to one of my favorite philosophers. His name is Dalton. They did a documentary on him in the movie Roadhouse. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a great documentary from my home state of Missouri. Pretty sure it's a documentary. Dalton said, be nice. Be nice. Even to the people you disagree with, be nice. And here's what's important about that. If I'm engaging with someone that I disagree with, let's say you and you have a completely different position than I do. You are totally opposed to my position. I'm totally opposed to your position. And we're having a conversation. And this is who I engage with. I will engage with the opposition all day long and twice on Sundays. I will engage with you, and I will be calm and consistent and polite. And it's been my experience that the more polite I am, the more you will lose your mind. Yeah. So I'm talking with you, but you're not my target. Arthur Brooks talks about this. Any Arthur Brooks fan in here? Give me a Ric Flair. Any Arthur Brooks? Nobody knows Ric Flair in this state? There he is! Arthur Brooks deserves a Ric Flair. So Arthur Brooks talks about this when he talks about there are 4 different people you can engage with. You can engage with the opposition. You can engage with the people who are with you, your supporters. You can engage with the apathetic, or you can engage with the on the fence people. I will engage with the opposition, which is what Arthur Brooks suggests. Why would you engage with the opposition? Because I will engage with you, and I'll be able to give my side of everything that you say in a calm, polite, and rational manner while you lose your mind. And this man on the fence over here sees both of this. Who's he going to side with? It's that simple. I do this on Facebook not all the time. I have 8 kids, so there's a little bit of time I have to spend with them. But be nice. Be polite. Be rational. Find and communicate accurate facts. I was talking with the lieutenant governor of Missouri a few years ago. And he said, Dwayne, I don't get it. And he told me a story about meeting with someone who gave him straight fake news. I mean, it was unbelievable fake news. But this person believed it with every part of their heart. There's one of those people you couldn't tell them any different. This was the way it was. And he said, I don't know where they get this, and I don't know what to do with it. But one thing was for certain. The next time that person approaches the lieutenant governor, is the lieutenant governor going to be thinking, oh, I love this guy. I can't wait to hear what he has to say. I'm sure it will be sound and logical. Or is he going to be saying, keep your calm, listen, smile, be nice, move along. You will destroy all your credibility if you go to a political leader with stuff that is easily disprovable and just flat out bogus. Research and find and communicate accurate facts. And get personal. Now, that's not what you're thinking. It's not a last resort where you've tried everything else and then you say, listen, scumbag. I'm not talking about that kind of get personal. I mean, how is this affecting you? How is this affecting you personally? How is this action going to impact your daily life? I'll give you an example. Like Eric, I tend to be more free trade. And this year, the wife and I were going to finally put a new roof on our house that's leaking in several places. And we had talked to the contractor about putting on a steel roof. And he gave us a quote last year. And this year, the quote is thousands higher. Because tariffs have increased the price of steel to the point where now my quality of life is lowered because of steel tariffs, because it's increased the price. That's how it's impacted me. That's getting personal. And I could get even more personal. I could talk about how now, because of the increase in price of steel, my roof costs more, which means my kids are going to have a lower standard of living, and they're not going to get the Christmas presents that we had planned for them. This is how it impacts me. Get personal with how it's impacting you. You can tell that story, and we want to use that story because people buy with emotion and they justify with logic. There's one thing you can remember from this, it's that. People buy with emotion and they justify with logic. So get personal. And finally, give a solution to the problem. When I was working with adjudicated youth, I've got a long, weird route that I took to standing right here today. But I used to supervise people, and they would come to my office and they'd say, Lester, this kid down the hall is doing this and this and this. And I'd say, okay, what's your solution? Well, I don't have a solution. I said, if you come to me with a problem and you don't have a solution, you're just complaining. I don't need somebody to complain. I need somebody to help me. One thing about this that I want to tell you a story. I want to make sure I got plenty of time. There's a guy named Anthony Fisher. He was born in 1915, flew with the RAF over Germany in World War II. Anybody heard of Anthony Fisher? It's a great story. He came back to England, found that his country was going down the same path to socialism that he just lost his brother to, and he said, this will not stand. I'm not going to allow this. And he started taking action to stop the march towards socialism in Great Britain. And he read this book called The Road to Serfdom. And he said, this is brilliant. I want to talk to the author. So he reached out to Frederick Hayek. Can you imagine that? How cool would that be? I want to go talk with Frederick Hayek for a while. Hayek was teaching at the University of London at the time and accepted Fisher's meeting. Fisher went to his office and said, I've read The Road to Serfdom. I think it's brilliant. I love everything in it. I'm going to run for office. And when I win, I'm going to implement every part of your book. And Hayek looked at him and said, you're a fool. He said, politicians are like corks bobbing on the ocean. You can be the cork or you can be the current. If you really want to affect politicians, if you really want to implement my ideas, fund think tanks. Because when something happens, politicians look around for whatever idea is laying there and they pick it up and they champion that. Hayek looked at him, and I love this quote. Hayek looked at him and said, politicians are secondhand dealers in ideas. Most of the things you see come out of your state houses or your city halls or Congress, somebody else wrote. Politicians aren't in there scribbling away trying to solve problems. Most of the time, I think they're fundraising, honestly. These bills that they champion, someone else put together. They're just secondhand dealers in ideas. Those are someone else's solutions they put together. So when you come, do your research and give a solution to the problem. Here's what we're dealing with. Here's the problem we're facing. Here's how we solve it. You can even write your own bills. You know who writes most of the bills? Unions, lobbyists, citizens. You can write your own bill. You can do it. I've seen people do it. So give the solution to the problem yourself. Because if I were a senator, I've got a lot of stuff going on. I appreciate your time. I'll see what I can do about that. But if I say, and here's how we solve it, I've already done all the work for you, you're going to have a much bigger impact. There are a few things you can do to help your case. One is give public support. Just saying, you know what, I love what this person's doing. I support them. That goes a long ways. Because a lot of the times, I don't know how many people on Twitter. I go to Twitter when I need to be insulted and called names. That's what they put up with, is a lot of attacks. So if you can be that counter and just give a little public support, that would be great. Intellectual support goes back to writing the bills, but you can also do the research for them. I know we're working on this bill. I know you're coming up in committee. Here's some research that me and my team put together, or my team and I put together, to help you better understand the issue. Let me know if you have any questions. Here's my card. I'm available anytime to help you. Give that intellectual support also. But you can also give moral support. How many people have called a political influencer to complain? Raise your hand. You liars, you know you have. How many of you called just to say thank you? Yeah, right. No, I'd never complain. A friend of mine, Brian, I've got 3 minutes left. I want to tell this story. He was really wanting to impact a political leader, and so he had a petition made, but he put the petition rather on pages. He put them on index cards, on postcards, and each postcard was from a constituent in a certain state rep's district. And at the time of the vote, Ryan had this manila envelope filled with these postcards delivered to the state rep's desk as the vote was happening. And he says, I couldn't have planned it better. The person who was taking the cards to the desk actually tripped and spilled the cards all over the floor right next to him. So they're picking up all these cards, and he's looking at them. These are all from my district, and they're all saying I need to vote this way. And I thought, what if you did the same thing, but then after they voted, and they voted the way you want, you delivered another envelope that was filled with thank you cards. Moral support goes a long way. I was speaking with a friend of mine who was a state rep in Missouri. He lives in Wisconsin now. And he told me that he did the math, and he could not believe how much time he spent away from his wife and his newborn when he was in the state house. He could not believe it. And another friend of mine who is a relative to my congressman said it takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your family because you're away all the time. It's got to be a lonely position at times. So to get a thank you, to get some moral support, that goes a long, long way. So let's keep moving forward. Why am I going backwards? Pushing the wrong button there. So how many people in here would consider themselves activists? I mean, get on the street, waving signs, knocking doors, hitting the phones, activists. This part's just for you. This is some high-tech stuff here. So here's your decision maker. This is the person you want to influence. If you really, really want to influence them, you've got to power map their life. You want to find 5 people in this decision maker's life that have a close relationship with them. And I mean, when I mean close, I mean if they call at 3 a.m, the decision maker will answer the phone. You need to find 5 with that close a relationship. You need to have 10 civic leaders with influence, and you need to know 20 people in their district. The 5-10-20 rule. Because sometimes it's just going to take one call from somebody close to them. Sometimes it's going to take a civic leader writing an op-ed, and sometimes it's going to take 20 people in their office. You've got to be prepared. You've got to be prepared for that. So I've got 10 seconds left. I just want to ask you a personal favor to me. How many have been to CPAC before? Anybody in here? You've been to events like this before, and you see sometimes you'll have a full room like this, and there's a dynamic, clearly intelligent speaker, good-looking, great hair, and as soon as that dynamic speaker's done, people just get up and file out of the room, and the next person coming on stage, it comes out there, and all they see are people leaving. So please, I don't know who's coming on next. But if you would be so kind as to not get up and leave, I mean, they're probably a nice enough guy or gal, I don't know. But I'd hate for them to come out here. And, I mean, first of all, they have to follow me, and that's hard enough. But to come in and see everybody filing out, what an awful feeling that must be. I want to encourage you all, if you want to learn more about GLA, I'm going to be across the hall in the Facebook room. Facebook's another one of the sponsors. They've got free coffee in there, a lot like that. They also have free swag. Facebook, believe it or not, there's some people there we should know. I'll be right across the hall if anybody has any questions. If you want to learn more about GLA, here's my email. D as in Dwayne, LESTER @afphq.org. afphq.org. If you can't find me or you lose my email, our allies are right outside, our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity. They'll be happy to help you out. With that, I bid you adieu.